I am your host, Nicole Will, and we're so happy you're here as we navigate the world with your aging loved one. We are here to come alongside older adults, family members, and the senior living community as we explore the world of aging and elder care with helpful resources, informative interviews, and approachable conversation. We get to do this together, so join us on our journey, and this is the willGather podcast. What would it be like to live in New York City, living your dream, being a young person, having gone to college and hanging out with your friends and get a call that your mom has a diagnosis? Adrienne Glusman is the host of Young Life Interrupted podcast, which shares the stories and offers hope to young caregivers. How do you go from that decision of living far away and needing to move closer to your loved one? What are all of those emotions that go into living a life that is now interrupted, of your hopes and your dreams and the trajectory that you thought that you were on? There is a surge of young caregivers. Where are resources for them? What does that journey look like that's unique to this age group? How do we find hope? And what does life look like after caregiving? She is sharing her story with us today and encouraging us to be present and live with hope. Here is my conversation with Adrienne Glusman. So happy that she's here with me today for this interview to share with us all about being a young caregiver and the journey that she went on with her mom. And so, Adrienne, welcome. Thank you for being with us today.
Thanks, Nicole. I'm so excited to finally be chatting with you. I love everything that you're doing with willGather, and I just truly appreciate you having me on to share my story as a young caregiver.
Yes, so thank you so much. And likewise, I feel like your voice is so needed in this space and can really affect a lot of people for good. And I'm really excited. We get to connect finally.
Yay!
I know, yay. I would love for you to tell us about how you got started and the relationship with your mom and what that was like.
Sure. So my journey is kind of I guess, a couple fold in terms of what caregiving looks like. So my journey started as a long distance caregiver. I was living in New York City. I had graduated from college. I was doing like the single girl, like Sex in the City, New York City, living the life.
Oh my God, I would love to live in New York.
It was pretty epic. So I was living out my life like any 20 something would do, trying to figure out what I wanted to do for a career, dating, just having a great time with friends. And I'm originally from Florida. So that's where my mom was living. She had recently retired. And when I would come down to visit, I would notice some things that were a bit off. And honestly, I just thought it was that my mom was being lazy now that she was retired, which I said, more power to you, mom. If you want to be lazy, be lazy.
Yeah.
And things weren't really clicking in my mind. So eventually she got a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease, which I feel like Parkinson's, hearing that diagnosis, since I didn't know too much about it, wouldn't hit me like hearing, oh, she got a cancer diagnosis.
Mhm.
So I heard about it. I don't really remember being that affected by it because I didn't really notice that many changes in my mom. So I call it the pivotal moment or the pivotal day where my life changed forever. When I had been trying to call my mom all day, she wasn't answering. A friend was going over to meet her for dinner. And I told the friend, I said, I haven't been able to get in touch with mom. To make a long story short, when the friend actually was able to get in, my mom was passed out cold on the floor of her bedroom. We don't know how long she was there. Thank God she was actually okay. But it was from that moment on that I knew that my life was going to be forever changed. So I continued living in New York City. I'm a very processed type of person. So before I went back to New York after flying down after this incident happened, I said, okay, mom, we've got to start putting some things in place. So the first thing I thought of were the infomercials for life alerts. So that was my first thing. My first go-to was a life alert. I also reached out to a home health agency because where we lived, we didn't have any family around. So there was really nobody who could come in, check on mom, maybe help her with some of the things around the house that she might be having a little bit more trouble with. And then we also made the decision to start looking at independent living facilities because I just knew that with Parkinson's, my mom was going to start declining. So it would be better to get something in place sooner rather than later. And my mom was on board with it because at first it was just an independent living community where there would be more people her age. There would be lots of activities. She wouldn't have to cook, clean, none of it. So we got her on the list for independent living, moved her in. I was still living in New York at the time, but I would fly down more often than not. I had a pretty flexible job, so that made it easy. But then the decline started happening, and the amount of anxiety that I was experiencing as a long distance caregiver, it was truly becoming unbearable. As mom started declining, she had a stroke. She kept falling more times than I can count. And I would get a call from the independent living that she'd fallen and she was in the hospital. And with no family around, I wasn't going to leave her in the hospital all by herself. We as caregivers know we have to advocate for our loved ones. So every time I couldn't get her on the phone, I automatically went to that place of panic. She's dead on the floor. Oh my gosh, I'm over 1,000 miles away. So in 2015, I made the decision, the very hard decision after living in New York City for 10 years. It's
Mm.
where I became the woman I am today. It's where I had a solid group of friends, developed my career. Like that was my identity. I had to leave all of that and move back to Florida. But I knew that this is what I needed to do because as the only child of divorced parents, my mom had always been there for me. She gave up her life so that I could have everything. So I decided this was just the universe's way of telling me that this is my time to do this for her. So I moved back to Florida, which was a big slap in the face, so to speak. I never thought that I would be living back in Florida ever again.
Yeah.
And now I was caregiving, I guess, up close and personal, so to speak. So when mom came to Florida, or I'm sorry, came down to Miami, which is where I was living, I decided that it was ready for the next stage of care because she was continuing to decline. So fortunately, I was very lucky enough to find an assisted living facility that was amazing. Move mom in there. But it wasn't one of those situations where I just dumped my mom. I was there probably 25 to 30 hours a week after work on the weekends. Like I would get her up from her afternoon nap, help her through dinner, change her, toilet her, get her into bed every night. So that was our routine from 2016 on. Of course, she ended up getting a re-diagnosis when she moved down to Miami, and we got her a new movement disorder specialist of multiple system atrophy, which is a rare neurological degenerative disease that's often misdiagnosed as Parkinson's. So getting this re-diagnosis actually answered so many questions that I had. So now I was learning so much about MSA, and I was aware of the different phases and the stages of decline and what was to come. And it's tough. It's tough as a caregiver trying to balance all the things. But as stressful and hard as it was, I was just so grateful that I had made the decision to move down and be closer to her. And in August of 2020, my mom got a UTI, which she'd had 1,000,001 times because she was in diapers. So I just figured, oh, she'll get an antibiotic. It'll clear up like it always has. But it actually did not clear up. And mom kept declining. She got to the point where she stopped eating and drinking. And I had to make the solo decision to put her in hospice care, which was super scary because there's so much stigma out there about hospice. And I made that decision by myself. There was no time to consult with anybody. And ultimately, I was the power of attorney. I was mom's decision maker and the one that she trusted. So I knew that it really needed to be what my intuition told me was best. So we put mom into hospice on a Friday. On Tuesday, I made the decision to send her into hospice inpatient. Mind you, this is when COVID's happening, pretty much in the thick of COVID. I sent her into hospice inpatient in the hopes that maybe getting an IV of fluid might help to revitalize her. It was kind of like that one last ditch effort. You know, as caregivers, we're always trying to come up with the next thing that might help them, or research the next thing that we can ask the doctors about. And unfortunately, it didn't help. And on August 26th, 2020, she passed away. So it was it was a really long, tough road, about 10 years of different facets of caregiving and doing it at such a young age and having to forsake so much of my life to show up for her.
First, I'm sorry for the loss of your mom. I
Thank
know
you.
you guys had such a special relationship, and
Hmm.
what a beautiful time that you together. But the fact that you could be close and made that decision from long distance caregiving to be closer
Hmm.
is a gift of time that you'll, I'm sure, be so thankful for, and you've learned so much from.
Yes, 100%. I told my mom when she was in her transition, and I had told her before, and I
Mhm.
said, Mom, my highest honor is and always will be that I was able to take care of you.
Yeah.
And I think that it's so easy for us to just look at all of the negative that comes along with caregiving because there is so much. Like, I think
Mhm.
even the most optimistic glass half full person, it would really be hard to maintain that emotional state. But to your point, having the gift of time, because I always think to myself, if mom would have never gotten sick, I would have still
Mhm.
been living in New York. I would have probably moved to California. I might even have moved abroad
Yeah.
and maybe just seen her at the holidays or the couple times of year that I came to visit. I mean, this gave us so much time, not necessarily the kind of time I had always imagined that we would have in the
Yeah.
years that she was retired, but it was still very special and allowed us to really solidify the bond that we always had my entire life.
You said there's so many gifts in that. What did you learn about yourself when you were in those moments that you'll take away and go, "Okay, I'm really glad that I was able to walk through that as hard as it was."
I mean, I always thought that I was a strong person. Like I said, I'm the only child of divorced parents, so I was being raised in a household by a single woman, like working, supporting her family. But I never knew the amount of strength that I really had, the amount of strength and the amount of perseverance to 1 minute just be crying on the bathroom floor and saying, why me? Why is this happening? To the next minute, jumping up and taking action. I think that's probably one of the biggest things caregiving taught me is that if I could be a caregiver, like I can do anything. I truly, truly believe that. I mean, those 10 years were by far to date the hardest decade of my entire life. And
Mhm.
I made it through. I mean, I have a lot of emotional baggage and trauma that came as a result of it, but I'm working through it and I'm on the other side of it. And I only feel like I'm stronger mentally and emotionally because of it.
And that you're able to now share with all those people that feel maybe alone in it, and that is such a gift to other people.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's another blessing too, is that I'm able to take the journey that I was on and all the things that I wish I would have known and now shed that light to others, help
Mhm.
others realize that they're not alone, that there are resources out there, that there are other young caregivers out there who may not be going through the exact same thing, but who can 100% relate to all the things.
Yeah. And when you talk about being a young caregiver, there's a lot of different aspects to that. What is it like, and how is it different from being a young caregiver to possibly, let's say, you're an older person and have an older adult in your life, and that
Yep.
possibly is a different experience? How would you define that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely obviously can't speak for people who are older in caregiving roles. I mean, obviously, across the board of caregiving, there are so many similarities. What I think tends to be the hardest and some of the biggest challenges of being a young caregiver are not only are we typically thrust into this role of all of a sudden having to grow up really quickly and care for someone who cared for us more often than not our entire lives and make executive decisions on their behalf. But we're also going through this entire phase of these life milestones, these typical quote unquote life milestones that people go through in their 20s and 30s, going to college, getting a degree, figuring out what you want to do as a career, dating and eventually finding your partner, buying your first home, starting a family, all of those typical things that tend to come into play in your 20s and 30s. Now, not only are you having to push pause on all of those life milestones, But now you have this massive responsibility in front of you that you never for a million years would have ever thought would be happening at such a young age. I always say, I always knew that I would be a caregiver one day, especially since I was an only child, but I always thought that it would come 30 years later, like when
Yeah.
I was in my 50s or 60s or even 70s, like definitely not in my late 20s at all.
You talked about that a little bit too, where you not only are experiencing the grief of the loss of your mom and your person in your life, but also all those emotions that you experienced that this isn't what you had planned for, right? All the plans that you had had and what you thought life would look like. How is that grief showing up in that way?
Yeah, I think one of the hardest things for me, and having met and talked to a lot of other young caregivers, the hardest thing is kind of seeing your life on hold while everyone around you is like moving forward. And we're kind of stuck in this. I think it's like that movie Finding Dory or Finding Nemo, where it's like just keep swimming, just keep swimming. Like we are literally just trying to keep our head above water. And for me, it's like you're starting to see people around you, like you're starting to see your friends get married, you're starting to see your friends hit all of these pivotal milestones, and you can't help but think, why am I the one stuck in this situation? So it's so hard because your whole life you're kind of on the same trajectory as your friends, right? Like you go to college, you all graduate, you get careers, but then all of a sudden it's like the trajectories and the paths like completely derail, or at least
Yeah.
the caregiver path derails.
Right.
And that's tough. It's tough to see all of these things that you wanted to happen not happening,
Mhm.
and coming to the realization that maybe one day you will have these things, but maybe you won't, because in a way you feel that this whole period of very pivotal time in your life has been kind of taken from you in a way, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And you wonder, like, will you ever get that back? Like, will you ever get the chance to do the things that you wish that you could do while you
Mhm.
were going through caregiving? Like, will you meet that person, or will you be too old at that point?
Yeah.
Will you be able to have children depending on where you are when your caregiving journey ends? Like, will you be too old? Is that even going to be an option for you? And I think that's where the grief sets in.
Mm.
Feeling almost in a way that you are losing your sense of self-identity. You're losing
Mm.
the person that you already knew, because you're not really able to be that same person, to do all of the things that that person did, to find the joy in things that that person did. And I think that's where a lot of the grief comes in. It's also really important, though, it's easy for me to say, but to try to pull yourself out of it and be optimistic and still try to do little things for yourself so that you still are able to maintain your sense of self identity. Being a caregiver is just like another layer to your story.
Yeah. Was there anyone or anything, resource that was pivotal for you?
So for me personally, I don't know if there was anything that was pushing me in terms of knowing that I could get through it. I think like internally, I was telling myself, like, Adrienne, you can do this. You can do this. It's going to be hard, but you're going to get through it and you can do this. I think for me, probably the biggest resource that really opened my eyes and really helped me feel less alone and more encouraged by others is finding a caregiver, a young caregiver Facebook group, where there were so many young caregivers every day posting about the struggles or the little wins or the different things going on. And for me, that was the biggest aha moment, because as a young caregiver, you think you're the only one out there your age that's going through what you're going through, because more often than not, nobody in your close circle of friends is going through or has been through the same thing. So the biggest resource for me was really just finding this group of people who knew what I was going through. I remember like I was creeping in the Facebook group when I first joined, just scrolling all the comments and reading all the things, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, these are the things that I'm thinking. These are the things that I'm feeling, and other people are feeling them too." And I think it was almost like knowing I had this network of people that were going through the same thing. It's like, "Okay, guys, we can all do this together." And I
Yeah.
think that's what helped fuel me through, is knowing I had that go-to place for support.
When we had talked before, we talked about there are more younger caregivers now
Mm.
than we feel like there have been before. I want to get your thoughts on that. Like, why is that? And also, you also felt like there weren't a ton of resources specific to young caregivers. And that is something that really spurred you to start your podcast,
Yeah.
Young Life Interrupted, to really speak and share those stories and connect with people. And opening people's eyes to, hey, this is a group of people that are going through this experience and offering that hope and encouragement to others.
Sure. I mean, the reality is our parents are aging, the gap is closing like in the boomer generation. And, for me, like my mom didn't have me until she was 39 years old.
Yeah.
So, I'm finding that it's just a lot of people. It's not only people developing degenerative diseases, but you're finding people whose parents are even so much younger than my mom was, even spouses. Um, people who are being diagnosed with illnesses. And then you weave COVID into the mix of
Mhm.
people who are thrown into caregiving as a result of COVID.
Yeah.
I mean, that adds like an entirely new layer onto things as well, especially people who might have had COVID, made it through, but now have a lot of health issues as a result. And in terms of resources, I honestly didn't know where to look. I think one of the
Mhm.
biggest things for me when I fell into caregiving is that I didn't self-identify as a caregiver. I don't even
Mm.
think I knew the word caregiver. I looked at myself as a daughter of a
Yeah.
woman who was now ill, and this is just what I'm going to do. This is just what being a good daughter is. This is just what being a child is you pay it
Mhm.
forward to your parents later in life. So for me, I think that was one of the big reasons that I didn't even necessarily seek out specific resources. It's like now, with social media and everything and hashtags and all of these things, I feel like it's so much easier to search a hashtag or just put in a Google search and it's so much easier to find things. But when I wasn't self identifying, I wasn't specifically looking for caregiver resources. And I always say when I finally turned that corner and started calling myself a caregiver, started self identifying as not just a good daughter caring for her mother, but as a caregiver, it was
Mhm.
like this whole new world opened up to me. That's actually when I first found that first Facebook group for young caregivers that I ended up joining. And I think so. This was back in 2015. I would search for young caregiver, millennial caregiver when I started self identifying, and there just wasn't that much. I found this Facebook group, I found a couple articles, but I just felt like that support part of it was very sparse. I would get into different Facebook groups for caregivers or look for resources for caregivers, but the challenge was that everyone was like so much older than I was. They thought
Mhm.
like, "Oh, you must be caring for your grandparent, not your parent." I remember when my mom and I went to an in-person patient caregiver support group. I mean, I was the youngest one there by at least 30 years. So I think that was a bit disheartening for me. And as I continued through my care journey and I started connecting with people, I started an Instagram handle just to be able to document my life as a caregiver, not thinking that anything would ever come out of it. But I had young caregivers sending me direct messages just saying, "Oh my gosh, we had no idea there was anyone like us out there. Your
Yeah.
posts totally resonate with everything that we're going through. They make us feel less alone." And I think starting that Instagram, although I never thought that it would come of anything, was really the catalyst to tell me that there needs to be more resources. Like young caregivers out there need to know that they are not alone. And
Mhm.
that's one of the main reasons I started the podcast. I mean, there's so many amazing podcasts for caregivers, but there was not one specifically catered to young caregivers where you have a young caregiver or former caregiver like myself
Mhm.
sharing experiences, telling stories, bringing on other young caregivers who are sharing their stories. So I really think the more support and resources specific to the young caregivers that are out there, the more people will be able to find them and be more aware and really feel less isolated and alone in their journeys.
Yeah, I love that important realization that you had with you didn't self-identify as a caregiver. And that's so true. That's not a part of our language that we use as a young person and
Yeah.
day to day.
Yeah.
Do you feel like we need to shift our language around it? Just curious to hear your take on that.
Yeah. I've heard a lot of different, I've actually heard conversation around this. Is caregiver the right word, or is it care
Mm,
partner? Or, there's been different variations of the word thrown out there. Like, I personally am totally fine with the word caregiver. I don't think that caregiver should refer to someone that's a caregiver at an older age or a younger age.
mhm,
But I just think the more that we, I guess, try to reach this subset of the caregiver population, really try to form more of a community surrounding the younger caregivers to really help them understand whether you're caregiving at a distance or whether you're living with your carry 24/7, whether you have 7 siblings who are each taking a different role or you're an only child, you are a caregiver. Because I think that's a piece of it too, is a lot of people think that they can only really call themselves a caregiver if they are living at home with their carry, caring for them 24/7, have no career as a result, have no
mm.
social interactions as a result. I think a lot of people shy away from calling themselves a caregiver, or saying that they are, and they have anxiety and frustrations and stress surrounding their situation because they always think of a caregiver as somebody that might have it quote unquote worse than them too.
Yeah.
So that's a big thing too, is the recognition and the self-acknowledgement that no
Mm.
matter how big or how little a role you play in the well-being of someone's life, like, you can call yourself a caregiver.
Yeah, that's a really accurate statement because I think we don't call ourselves a caregiver unless we feel like that's our formal role at that time when
Right.
it shows up in so many different ways. I really
100%. And
do.
I used to feel this way too. I mean, I remember getting into these Facebook groups, and people would post and their stories were just so much worse than mine. And so I thought to myself, oh my gosh, well, I can't post in here. Like, I can't talk about the frustrations and the stress and the unhappiness and the anxiety I'm feeling, because this person has it a million and one times worse. And I know for a fact that a lot of caregivers go through the same thing too. So they try to just continually push those feelings down, but
Mm.
like, put them out there. Like I said before, it doesn't matter what you do or what stage of decline your loved one is in. Like, you are a caregiver if you are doing anything for them. And I think that's important for people to recognize that, so they're a bit more forthcoming and open with their feelings as well.
I'm so glad you said that because I think we do that. We always compare. It's human nature to
Yeah.
say, I shouldn't complain because it's not as bad as this person, but yet
Right.
we're feeling all of those emotions and we're feeling all of those things, not only the grief piece, but what other emotions do you struggle with? Is it, I know for families, it can be that guilt of you are so thankful to be caring for your loved one, but then you feel guilt and feel bad about it, or it's hard.
Yeah.
And so all it's just so complex and living also with those dual emotions, I can feel a lot of joy that I get this time with my mom, and this is really hard.
Of course.
What was that like for you?
Ugh. I mean, it was, I say that caregiving is a love-hate relationship, because it really
Mm,
is. I honestly wouldn't have changed the trajectory of my caregiving journey. I think it's really hard when you're in the throes of it to see that, because
mm,
for me, it was really hard to see it. It was really hard to understand why. And it was really not only why, I mean, at first I was very selfish. It was like, why is this happening to me? And then I had to stop myself and say, this is not just happening to you. Like, this is happening to mom. This is the last thing mom would have ever wanted for herself. So I always say that it's such a love-hate relationship, because as much as I loved caring for her, as much as I loved being there for her and being able to do all of the things that she did for me, she was the best mother I could have ever asked for in my entire life. And so in return, I felt the need to be the best daughter to her. And I wanted to be. I actually wanted to be. I didn't feel forced.
Mm.
Along with the love-hate relationship came a lot of guilt, because even though I was with my mom, what felt to me like all the time, there was so much guilt that I would feel. Guilt if there was a day that I wouldn't come see her. Guilt if I would have to leave early. Guilt if I would try to take a little vacation, just to kind of get away. Just guilt. And I know that guilt is such a real and raw emotion as a caregiver. I would feel so much anger. I mean, it's like caregiving, the emotions run the gamut, I think, depending on where you are in your stage of caregiving. And, I think for me, another raw emotion was something I didn't learn until after my mom passed, was this term anticipatory grief. So it
Mm.
was like all the emotions and the grief and everything that I was going through those 10 years was anticipatory grief, which is basically experiencing grief and the roller coaster of emotions that come with it before someone passes away. And I didn't hear that term until my mom passed away. But when I did, I couldn't even believe it. It was like my it was like that brain blows up emoji
Yeah.
of just thinking to myself, oh my gosh. So for 10 years, I have been going through anticipatory grief. And every
Mm.
caregiver out there is going through it. And this might be the first time they're even hearing that term. But
Yeah.
every cycle of my mom's decline, it was like I'd get a little bit optimistic and then it would come crashing down, a little bit optimistic, and then it's the next decline.
Mm.
So, the roller coaster of emotions that came with, I would say probably those 10 periods over 10 years of anticipatory grief was a
Mhm.
lot. It's a lot to handle. The emotions are so much to handle. And I think for me too, is something that I very candidly and openly talk about now, is taking those frustrations and emotions out on the one that you're caring for. And
Mm.
I openly admit, like, there were times I would yell at my mom. There were times that I would make her cry because I was getting so intense and filled with emotion. And it's just so hard because there's so many emotions happening at once, and learning how to balance those emotions and deal with those emotions to serve not only yourself, but the one that you're caring for is so important.
I love your honesty because it's something that so many people are experiencing.
Yeah.
Part of that and it shifted for you because then after she passed, you went into this post caregiving mode and all of the emotions around that. What
Yeah.
is life like for you now?
So I am about a year and a half post caregiving. The first year was very hard. It was it's actually weird. Let me back up for a minute. It's
Mhm.
and I'm going to just be raw and authentic in that there were so many times during caregiving when I just wanted it to be over. I wanted it to be done. I didn't want my mom to have to suffer because she had no quality of life at one point, and I selfishly didn't want to have to do it anymore. So it's like this weird balance of devastation of losing the most important person in my life, but then also you almost feel in a strange way that you probably don't want to admit, like, this weight has been taken off your shoulder. And I will say
Yeah.
a burden, because sometimes I know that we feel that it is a burden, but it was like this weird dynamic of the emotion and like the fact that I was able to breathe again. Like, I had all the grief and the anxiety and the grief bursts, and I miss my mom so much to this day. I mean, just last night, something reminded me of her and I just started crying. But I have to say that life is totally different. It's, there's days that on the weekend, I feel like my phone became such a source of anxiety for me when my mom was alive. Because every time a number would pop up on my screen that wasn't programmed in my phone, my heart would drop because I thought it was the assisted living. I thought it was a nurse. I thought it was a hospital. So now, I mean, there's times when I'll leave for the week, I'll go somewhere, run errands. Like, I won't even bring my phone.
Wow.
Um, my life personally has changed so much in that I'm about to get married in 2022. I've inherited a stepdaughter through my marriage. So it's very interesting, like what our family dynamic now looks like. Cause I think about like, if I were in this family dynamic now with my fiance and my stepdaughter, I mean, before I was going to my mom's at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon and not coming home until 10 o'clock at night, 5 days a week. Like, would I even be at this point? So it's super crazy because I honestly feel that my mom, when she knew that I had found my person and that this was it and we were going to get married, I honestly believe that that's when she knew that she could finally let go. When she
Oh,
knew that I was going to be taken care of and I was going to start having this whole other life. I think she wanted me to be able to have that. And yeah, it's so different. It's allowed me to fuel my caregiving initiatives forward. It's really just allowed me to travel. And it was so weird. Like the first big trip I took after my mom passed away, I was just like, wait a minute, I get to go and not have to like actually truly be able to enjoy the trip without like these lingering thoughts in the back of my mind. Like, oh my gosh, what if I get a call from one of mom's nurses, the aides, if she's in the hospital? I mean, all of
mhm,
that is gone now, but it's like, it's very strange because in a weird way, like I at times would give it all. I would trade it all like just to have her back. And I know
yeah,
that sounds so strange, but I know that other people who are on their, I call it your grief journey,
yeah,
would say the same thing. Like, no matter how hard it was, no matter how many times I wish that it was over, like now not having my mom, I think especially now, like I'm getting married and I'm all these things that I wish that she would have had a chance to see, even though I know she's seeing them from heaven. Um,
yes.
I would, in a weird way, sometimes want to trade it all back just to have her again.
I was getting tearing up while you were sharing when your mom knew that you found your person, that she could be at peace knowing that you're taken care of and be okay. I was just thinking back to when my grandma had passed. She lived in the nursing home where I had worked, and my mom, when she came in the room, it was like she knew that it was okay, it was time. And so many countless stories of that, and I feel like she just knew that you were going to be okay
Yeah.
and with your person. And I
Hmm.
know you want her there for those big moments and those experiences, but
Yeah.
she is watching and she's
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. And she got to meet Ian, my fiance, not as much because of COVID, but, and he got to say his goodbyes to her in the
Mhm.
hospital, even though she was transitioning, but he
Mm.
got to tell her all the things that he
Yeah,
wanted to say just to give her that reassurance.
yeah,
So it's special.
it is. I'm so glad that that could be a part of that for you.
Yeah.
There's like, I think tears, I welcome them.
Yeah. It's,
Because there was someone that said something recently that, the grief and the tears just shows how much love was there.
uh-huh.
And that you kind of want to experience that in ways every day, or, how many ever times that shows up for you is like, oh yeah, that love was there and it's so real and I'm still feeling it. And that's
Mhm.
okay.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the love will never go away. It's
Yeah.
things are different now, but the love is infinite and lasts for all time. So yeah,
Yeah.
and I know, and I always say I know that mom is looking down, and Ian and I always say that so much has happened like good in our lives for us since my mom passed, and we truly believe that it's because of her. Like it's because of her doing, it's because of her energy. um,
Mhm.
she's helping bring to life so many goals and dreams for us, and we truly believe that she's watching over us. So
Yeah.
it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. It's tough, but it's a
Yeah.
beautiful thing. And look, like it's so selfish for me to say I wish my mom were back with me, but just knowing that she's free from pain, she's
Mm.
free from just all the things that the disease took over, that in
Mm.
and of itself gives me joy because it was so hard. I mean, it's any caregiver knows it's so hard to watch your loved one just rapidly decline right before your eyes. So just to know that whatever you believe in, like whether you believe in the fact that they're healed and they're one, and that definitely brings me a lot of comfort too.
When you talk about your mom, or when we've talked about her, we've talked about her in the disease.
Mhm.
And I would love for you to share, like, what was your mom like pre
Yeah.
disease? Like, what were some of your favorite things about her? And
Yeah.
I don't know. I just would love to hear
Yeah.
that.
For sure. Yeah, it's interesting because, and I've heard other caregivers say this too, is that because I was a caregiver for 10 years, it's almost like the before gets
Mm,
blocked. And
interesting.
I know it's like a mental thing.
Or
And
like a coping
maybe it's
mechanism?
a coping mechanism. I'm not sure, but it's like the images I have of her and the memories all revolve around the 10 years of caregiving. Um, which I think in time though, like as you move through the grief journey, I imagine that those old memories start coming back to you more. The images, like I don't remember like an image in my mind of my mom being well, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Even though it was only a 10-year journey, it's like those 10 years feel like 100 years.
Yeah.
But I mean, my mom was an amazing human being, kind, caring. I mean, she was the person like everyone always turned to you for like a listening ear. Um, she was the best mom I could have ever asked for. I mean, she was a full-time working mom. I remember her volunteering at my school. Like she was always so involved. Like she did whatever she could. I danced when I was young. So she always made sure that I got to take my dance lessons and perform in the recitals and do all the things. And, I think her love was just so evident in the way that I took care of her. So I feel like a lot of who my mom was is really reflected through me. My fiance says that all the time. Like
Mm.
you exude who your mom was. So yeah, she was pretty awesome for sure. I
Yeah.
feel very blessed because I know a lot of people don't have that sort of bond, whether it's with a mother, a father, a grandparent. Some people don't necessarily have that tight knit bond with the person that cares for them. So I
Yeah.
feel very, very lucky to have had her, to have her, because she still is part of my life, um, in my life. And, um, I think that helped me in caregiving because I was able to recall like everything she did for me. And I think that's what you asked earlier, like what kept getting me through. And I think just remembering everything that my mom gave up for me and gave for me and
Mm.
sacrificed for me, like
Mm.
that's what pushed me through. That's what told me, like, Adrienne, like mom did all this for you to get you where you are today. Like
Mm.
she deserves this. Not like you owe this to her. It's like she deserves this. She deserves this for being such an amazing person her whole life. So
Mm.
yeah, she was very cool. In a lot of ways, I'm not like her. But I'm very outgoing and loud spoken and very personable. And mom was definitely more like, a little bit shyer. I would always joke with her, like, are you sure I'm your daughter? Because we're different in so many ways, but
Yeah.
in all
Oh,
of like the loving, nurturing, caring ways, like I get all of that from my mom.
yeah. What was her name?
Her name was Hetty. Hetty. She was Dutch. Yeah, Hetty. And she's an amazing, amazing person. And everybody that knows her and was touched by her, feels the same thing. So there was never a moment in time either that because she was such an amazing person and because she was such an amazing mom, I always made sure she knew that. Like, I always thanked her for being a great mom. Like, always reminded her, like, even through her decline, thank you for
Mm.
still being an amazing mom. Thank you for being my mom.
Yeah.
Because, even though as she started declining, things were very different in terms of like the mother-daughter relationship. It was like just having her there and feeling her touch
Mhm.
just made me remember like, okay, this is mom.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It's the presence of our moms at times.
Exactly. 100%. That's exactly it. It's just the presence that's there, even if all the other typical things that like the nurturing and the things that a mom would do, like even though she couldn't do them at a certain point, it was to
Mhm.
your point, it was truly just the presence of having her.
You talked about identifying as that caregiver, but also that there's so much to you as you are a person. And I think sometimes we lose that identity of, okay, I'm in this role. Who am I? How did you decipher? I don't know if decipher is the right word, but
Yeah, I mean, aside from being a caregiver, I danced my entire life. I'm a huge Broadway fan.
mm,
Actually, I wanted to dance on, that was a dream for a while, that I wanted to dance on Broadway for a while. It didn't happen, but that's okay. Now that I see what's happened in my life since then, everything works out for a reason. I love to travel. I've traveled to 39 countries. That's probably like my biggest passion in life is traveling. And
where's your favorite place you've been? Or do you have like a couple of favorites?
yeah, I love Thailand. My fiance and I went to Greece this past June, so that was incredible. And I love like Argentina. I mean, every place has its own beauty
I
and
know it's hard to narrow
it's
it
so hard
down.
to narrow it
Yeah.
down. So, traveling is a huge part of who I am. I love to, since I dance, like I love to perform, like I'll get on a stage and sing and dance in front of people. I love to be outdoors. Like I live in Miami, so I'm right by the beach. I love to just be outside and take in nature. Um, I'm very spiritual, so I'm a big believer in the universe only brings us things that we can handle. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
I love to hear about people. Like my favorite thing is learning from people and just I relate to the travel piece. It's a huge part of my life and what I love. I think you
Yeah,
learn so much about yourself too when you travel.
a
So
hundred
many
percent.
lessons. Yeah.
Yeah, so many.
Given your life and all that you've been able to walk through, what would you say to people that are in it and going through it?
I know that when you are in it, to hear from somebody else say, like, you'll make it through, you got this, you're so strong, like, you just want to punch them in the face, to be perfectly honest. I
I
mean,
love that honesty.
it's
It's
so
so
true
true. You're
though.
like,
Like,
"Don't tell me."
it's people are like, all right, yeah, I don't want to hear it. And I get that because I've been there. But I think the thing to hang on to is just knowing that, at least for me in my situation, like looking back, I have never once regretted the choice that I made to give up my life in New York, to move back to Florida, to push pause, to start doing all these like milestone things later in life. I would never give up I would give up all of that
Mm,
just to be able to care for my mom again. And I do not regret it for a second. And as hard as it is and as unfair as it is, like you will get through it. There is life on the other side of caregiving. And I'm not saying that you should always be thinking to the future. It's so important to stay in the present, but as much as you can, like cherish this time that you have with your loved one. Like you said, Nicole, at the very beginning, one of the gifts of caregiving is the gift of time. And even though that time and that interaction with them doesn't necessarily look like what you thought it might look like, maybe you're saying to yourself, well, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do with them? Like sit there, hold their hand, play some music that they loved. Just talk to them, even if they can't respond, even if they can't understand, have some quality time with them because those are the moments, whether they'll remember them or not, you'll remember them. And I hear so many caregivers say, like, I just wish I had more time to say the things. I just wish I had more time to do the things. Say the things. Say the
mm,
things that you want to say. Do the things with them that you want to do. And if it's too late to do like the bigger things with them, do the small things. I know for me, like when I was with my mom I was always just thinking about what's next. Okay, she's up from her nap. Okay, so dinner's in an hour. Okay, then she's going to have to take her medicine. Okay, I have to call this doctor. I have to make this appointment. I have to order. And it was always like just thinking of the next thing instead of saying, Adrienne, stop and spend some time focused on mom. Stay present with mom. That's some advice that I would give. And the hope that I would give is just knowing that this is not going to last forever. And even if you feel like your timeline has been thrown off, I say throw timelines out the window. Like any timeline that you ever had for yourself needs to be like thrown to infinity and beyond, because it doesn't matter. And a timeline only makes us more anxious about not meeting like the dates on that timeline. So chuck the timeline. Know that it's never too late. It's never too late to meet someone. It's never too late to move to this place that maybe you've always wanted to live. It's never too late to travel. It's never too late to do all the things. It's just that your timeline has shifted. So hold on to that hope. I know that for me, that was a big thing that I needed to do. And I've come out on the other side and I'm traveling again. I'm getting married. All the things that I wanted years ago, I have now. Also the self-satisfaction that I was able to give my mom the best last years of her life that I could have.
I know people are going to just hang on to that, as hard as it is, but your words are comforting. And that's sometimes what we need, is just those comforting words that we're not alone. How can people connect with you? Where can we learn more?
Sure. So I have an Instagram. It's at Young Life Interrupted. As Nicole mentioned, I also have the Young Life Interrupted podcast, which is available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I also have a private Facebook group, again, Young Life Interrupted, for young caregivers who are looking for a group to join, just for community and support and the opportunity to interact with other young caregivers. So if you are looking for support, I welcome you with open arms into the group, and don't hesitate to reach out to me in any way, directly through the group, or otherwise, just to connect, because I love connecting with young caregivers. I love hearing their stories and just being able to offer a means of support to them that they might not be receiving anywhere else.
Thank you. And I'm so, so glad we could talk today. It's just been great to hear your story and visit with you, and just that shared community and connection. So thank you. And we'll include all of those links in our episode description so people can look and find out more about you. But thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. Thank you so much for the conversation and just the opportunity to share my story and reach other young caregivers. So thank you so much.
And now, time for an ad break. So I have to tell you about my friend Jimmy Zolo and his new company, Joe and Bella. Our paths had crossed, and I'm so glad that they did. Jimmy is passionate about older adults. He told me that after both of his grandparents moved into a care community, his family's world has turned upside down, and they really became caregivers overnight. As you know, being a caregiver to someone close to you can be overwhelming, and there's so much to manage, like making sure your loved one has all of the products they need, keeping things stocked when things run out. And Jimmy's family also had that same problem. They were scrolling through all of these product reviews online, unsure what would be the best to purchase. It can be really time consuming and frustrating, and he wished there was a simpler way to shop for his grandparents. Jimmy decided to launch his own business to solve this problem. He founded Joe and Bella to make shopping for older adults simple. They carry everything from comfy shoes to creative gifts, even toiletries that can automatically be reordered, and technology that makes caregiving easier. And what I love, and I know you guys will too, is that each and every product on Joe and Bella has been carefully selected by caregiving experts. Jimmy is giving an exclusive offer to listeners of this podcast. You can use promo code GATHER to receive 10% off your first purchase at joeandbella.com. That code is GATHER, GATHER, for 10% off at joeandbella.com. Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed our episode, please subscribe and give us 5 stars. In all honesty, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening to our episode.